Hi there, my name is Matt Furness and this is The Culture Hack, a video and podcast series that captures experiences and life lessons from those who know culture best. The goal? To help you to understand, design and change your company culture. Thanks for tuning in. Hi everybody and welcome to The Culture Hack. It's Matt Furness here from Click Culture Consulting and I'm delighted to be joined today by Caspar Craven. Now, it's hard to capture everything that Caspar has achieved, but I'll do my best. So Caspar has sailed twice around the world, the first time on the world's toughest yacht race and the second time with his family. He was a director at KPMG. He's had several stints as a CFO. He's built multiple ventures from scratch, one of which he sold for a seven-figure sum. He's a best-selling Bloomsbury author who's written several books about topics like being more human at work and setting big, bold goals. Today, he's an inspirational keynote speaker who talks to some of the world's biggest and best organizations about leadership, mindset, and teamwork. But I think more important than all of that, the interactions that I've had with Caspar have led me to believe that he's a really kind human being. And so because of all of that, I'm really looking forward to speaking to him today. So welcome, Caspar. Thank you so much for coming on.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, Matt. And I've got that same sense about you as well, by the way, about kindness too. So I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you very much. Awesome. Brilliant. And we'll be talking about all things company culture. But first, I've tried to do your story some justice, but tell us a little bit more about your story and your background.
Okay, great. Well, look, I think you did a pretty good job there, actually. So so let me add in a little bit more colour. So so first job out of university was training as a chartered accountant. So very much a numbers driven background. And then after that, joined KPMG as an investment banker, which I did all told for about 5 years. Although within that, I managed to take a year off to go and sail around the world on the BT Global Challenge, which was affectionately known as the world's toughest yacht race. Learned a huge amount about people, what happens when you put people under pressure in extreme situations, and came into interaction, I guess, with cultures, with people that I just wouldn't normally have met. So it gave me a much more rounded, much more diverse view of the world. Came back from that and finished my time at KPMG. And then after that, I've been launching my own ventures ever since. Both my own ventures and also being CFO in some ventures for other people as well. So since then, built various different businesses. And perhaps notably as well, in 2014, decided to go around the world a second time with my wife and our 3 kids under the age of 10. My wife didn't sail beforehand, so we had quite a steep learning curve to go up with getting everything ready, didn't have a boat, all sorts of different things why it should never have worked. And again, that whole extreme experience taught me an awful lot about culture and about the mindset to do things a little bit differently. I think since coming back from that adventure in 2016, I've been launching some exciting new businesses, disrupting different markets, and also writing books and spending most of my time actually on the speaking circuit, talking to organizations about the mindset that we need to be able to thrive in today's very fast-moving, very disrupted world. So, hopefully a little bit more color in there.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Caspar. And what I find fascinating about your story is that you sort of sit at the intersection between the sort of accountancy, hard financial side of things, whilst also simultaneously crossing over to the HRE people culture side. And with that in mind, the reason I find that interesting is because I think at times people in HR and people in culture type roles are trying to persuade people in CFO roles or financial roles to give them budget. So what I'm really curious to hear is, as someone who's been a CFO in the past, how high or low was culture on your business's priority list?
Look, the short answer is that it was low, and I'll tell you a story. I remember when I was working for one of the big 4 accounting firms, and being part of a small group, being asked our view on how the organization was doing and different things we could be doing. And I remember talking about, the human side of things. I've always been drawn to that side of things, what makes us tick as human beings. And I got almost dismissive response back from one of the senior people there. Oh, well, yeah, that's all the soft skills type stuff. Let's focus on the hard stuff, shall we? And the strategy and those sorts of things. And it's like, whoa, hang on a second. And there was just something about that just really jarred with me. And I think, even that language, isn't it? The soft skills, it just puts a sort of a polish on it, which I think is just not the most helpful thing. And I think those things sit right at the heart of how does any organization achieve things. So, that's the whole notion. We only hear what we understand, right? And I think that to really understand this stuff, you have to look at it from that human-centric view of the world. And one of my favorite neuroscientists, Anthony Damasio, he says, we're not thinking creatures who feel, we're feeling creatures who think. And I think it's that understanding of human beings, which is so crucial to how we're going to achieve anything together as a team. It's unlocking the talents of each different person. And I think, from when I go back to my numbers-driven side of the world, it just didn't really sort of take account of that. And so I think that's the bridge to overcome. And clearly, I was sitting on both sides of that. So how does one sort of get people coming on that journey and helping to explain that? Because you can't explain it quite so easily in terms of hard ROI numbers and those sorts of things. So I think it has to be stories, it has to be experiences to get people to start to really appreciate this. And in the work that I did, there's a number of different techniques that I use to help to bring that to life to people. And there's no question in my mind at all that it's just so fundamental in terms of how we do that. And I've got some stories about how that came to life for me. And maybe I'll share that story, actually. Sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say what I really appreciate about your answer there is your honesty. I think a lot of organizations, I hear them say, yeah, culture is a great priority for us, but then their actions and where they spend their budget it suggests otherwise. So I really appreciate you saying, no, actually it wasn't a priority at the time. And you're getting into my next question, which I think you're getting into, is when you were a CFO, what would have persuaded you to invest more in culture? I'll pause there. That's the question.
Yeah.
What would have persuaded you to invest more in culture?
So I'll tell you the specific story about what persuaded me to invest more in culture. Again, I go back to that notion I'm fascinated of learning at the extremes. And I think it was around 2012. And, I had a mission to build our business. And I started driving things very, very hard, really, really pushing things. Because aggressive growth targets, which is not an uncommon feature, right? And everything came to a head to me when basically my team turned around to me and said, we're not sure we want to work with you anymore because we don't like the way that you're driving things. And I was threatened with everybody walking out. And that was the point in time. It's like, you know what? These approaches that I've developed about numbers first, driving for the numbers, pushing people really, really hard, I'm not sure that's working anymore. And I was literally faced with that thing. It's like, okay, I need to do something different. And back in the day, that was when I went and started working with a coach. Again, there's an alien concept to me. Basically, my team encouraged me to go and do that. Someone who can hold the mirror up to you and show you those blind spots, those things that you can't see. And Margaret was my coach. And, she shared the very powerful South African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, then you have to go together. And for me, it's like, okay, that light bulb moment. I can't do this on my own. We need to have a team of people. I can't just drive people to the numbers. I've got to engage people, find out what's driving each of them. We have to get the culture right. So it was almost like it was the breaking point for me that literally slapped me around the face and said, I need to go and do this in a different way. I hope that nobody else out there has to go to that pain point to get to that realization point. But I'm sure that, stories like that, and there'll be plenty of other stories out there that get people to stop and say, okay, what is it that we need to do to engage our people, to get our culture right so that we can really go and achieve these things together? So, combination of stories and hopefully not so many bad experiences. I mean, look, the research backs it all up as well. I mean, in the latest book, there's a whole bunch of research which all points towards the same sort of thing. The companies that get the right culture, they go further, they go faster, they achieve more things. So it seems fairly self-evident to me, having been inside the research and my own experiences, that's the right way to do things.
Mm. So I've heard a couple of things there. The first, I think, point is around almost getting that light bulb moment through helping people to feel it and to hold up the mirror so they recognize truly what their impact might be at the current time on others, so that they understand that this stuff isn't soft, it's actually hard. And then the second is, if in combination with that, relying on the sort of the logical argument around the research and the evidence around what you will get by focusing more on company culture.
Yeah, no, exactly right. Yeah, the research, the science backs it up. It's a good thing to do. And if you don't believe that, again, try it yourself and then see what happens when you get to the extremes, and it will come unstuck. So
great. And what are the mistakes that you've seen sort of CPOs, HR directors make when trying to approach you as a CFO or talk to you as a CFO about culture? What are the turn-offs? What are the mistakes that you've seen them make?
that's a good question. The mistakes that people make. I mean, I think one of the key things, I think, is to be able to influence anybody. You've got to understand what's already influencing them. So I think it's an acknowledgement of the priorities for different people in the different roles. So I think it's taking the time to step into anybody else as well. I mean, that's general sort of anything if you want to influence somebody. So it's almost like, so you're the CFO. I get you have responsibility for doing this. You have for driving this, for keeping the numbers tight, and so on. And then it's explaining how whether it's the CPO role or the CHR role or whatever it is, it's explaining how that fits within that. And one of the things that I'm always a great proponent of is what I call deep listening. And it's so much the case, isn't it, that when we ask people questions and we listen and we hear the answer, we're not really listening. We're just, thinking about what we're going to go and say next. And I think there's something very powerful about understanding the drivers for the different people around the table at the senior level. Well, what actually are the things that are going on? Because we're so focused on our own thing, aren't we? But actually understanding that bigger picture. And I guess, in my world, I've been lucky enough to, having worked in lots of different early stage businesses, to have worn all the different hats and to have felt and to experience that perspective. But I guess someone who's been in one line role all the way through wouldn't necessarily understand that. So asking questions, being curious, what are the pressures that you're facing, and going into people's worlds? Because I think the more we do that, the more we can appreciate, the more we can understand, and therefore the more we can influence as well. So taking the time, basically, which, is a hard thing to say when we're all pressured. I get that. And nobody's sitting around saying, I've got a spare few hours this week. What shall I do with that? Nobody. So it does take some conscious work to find that time. But I do believe that genuinely pays dividends, taking that time to really understand.
So it's taking the time to talk to the CFO or the CEO, whoever holds the purse strings, and to really truly understand what is keeping them up at night, and then any messages that you want to share, orienting them around those key concerns, those key motives, those key things. And I think what I would add to that is sometimes what people say won't give you the honest answer, and you might need to do a little bit of sort of reading between the lines and sort of observing what they're not saying to help you to shape your point, because I think people won't always tell you the honest things that might be motivating them or concerning them at a given time,
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I think just on that point. I mean, just how ruthlessly honest are people? Then I think the answer is people often give I think it was the guy who founded J.P. Morgan, Julius Pierpont Morgan, who always says there's always two reasons that people give you: the reason that sounds good, and then the real reason. And of course, the key thing is trying to get down to the real reason. What's actually going on here? Because so often we hear that surface level thing. It's like, that's not really the answer, is it? And that only comes from that trust building. It's funny, a lot of the work that I do with clients, we spend a lot of time really building, certainly amongst senior leadership teams, that openness, that listening, that trust, that vulnerability, focusing on what each person is amazing at, and really starting to get people to connect as human beings. And I think once we do that and we have that level of trust, that level of understanding, then all the other problems downstream from that can be solved much more easily. And so I was with someone yesterday, and I was talking about the whole strengths-based approach. And she was saying, okay, well, yeah, I'm going to go and do a strengths and weakness conversation with people. It's like, well, I don't think that's a good idea to do strengths and weaknesses together. It's such a cliched thing, isn't it? Because if you do that together, then all someone is waiting for is, oh, what's the weakness? What's going to come up? And you forget about the strengths, and actually separating those two different things and spending that time creating that cohesion together in a warm, fuzzier place where you're open, you're trusting, you're vulnerable. I think that when you do that, then you have the bedrock dealing with so many other tough things. So, it comes back to the understanding point, doesn't it? So.
And what I'm noticing from this conversation is already lots of the things that you're sharing are ideas that you shared in your most recent book, The Big Bold Mindset, which I've recently read. And what I love about it is how you've written it. You've written it without sort of big chunky paragraphs. You've really just split up key points, and it was really enjoyable to read. But for the benefit of the learner, tell us a little bit about what that book is about and what motivated you to write it.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for the question. So look, in 2020, I wrote this book here, Be More Human, which is all about how do we rethink the rules of high performance teamwork. And that book for me was bringing more humanity, more empathy, more understanding into the workplace. Not just because that's the ethical thing to do, which it is, but actually it's probably the single best thing that any organization can do to make their organization, help their organization achieve their goals. And I remember doing a talk for a large professional services firm, and I sat down afterwards with the CEO and the HR director, and I held up two copies of the book. One said "Be More Human," the other one said "Big Bold Goals." And I said, "I'd love to send you a copy of the book. Which one would you like?" And the HR director said, "Can I have Be More Human?" And the CEO said, "Can I have Big Bold Goals?" And I suddenly realised that a book called "Be More Human" it resonates with people in L&D and HR and so on, but not necessarily with senior decision makers. And so therefore, that was the thing that started me off writing The Big Bold Mindset. And so there's many of the similar principles in Be More Human appear in The Big Bold Mindset. But that was just my starting point. Since then, it's like, well, actually, I want to go and research and study what some of the most effective leaders on the planet are doing and how are they achieving their big bold goals. So the latest book brings in latest science, latest research, latest thinking. It's got some provocative thinking in there, which I think is not commonplace in the working world. So basically, it's just so my reason for writing, therefore, was to just challenge how things are done and say, you know what, is there a better way for us to lead our organizations, for us to build our cultures, for how do we achieve things together? So basically, it was meant to be a shot in the arm of fresh thinking and a series of ideas for aspiring leaders.
Fantastic. So it's this idea of learning from best case examples and extreme examples of things that leaders and businesses have been able to achieve. And within that, you talk about 5 themes and 21 leaders for the modern 21 areas for the modern leader to focus on. My question to you then is, which one or two of these are the areas that you think would have the biggest impact on the culture that the leader creates around them?
Yeah. So which ones would have the most impact? I'm gonna pull out 2, and they're in direct conflict, if you like. So I'm going to juxtapose those two different things. So they're related. So the first one I would say is, I think that it's the first section is around thinking bigger. And just radically reevaluating how we look at what we're going to go and grow. Because I think, we live in a very disrupted world now. I can't think of any sector that's not being disrupted. The McKinsey quote from last year, the pace of change will never be this slow again. That's the economic backdrop. That's the backdrop to the world. And one of my favorite sayings is that you can't navigate a new world using an old set of charts. We're definitely in a new world now with this pace of change. And I think depending on who you speak to in the working world, you can figure out the models and the thinking they have. Was it 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago? And you can see the thinking and the models that have influenced them. And so for me, it's like, well, okay, what are the things that we need to be doing differently? And for me, the big thinking is that process of going out 5 years from now and saying, okay, what does that world look like? What does that ecosystem look like? What are the trends? What are the patterns? What are the changes? And to start to chart where you want your organization to be positioned in 5 years' time. Not today, because today won't exist. It'll move on very, very quickly. And so to orientate around that model out there. And of course, to work backwards from that. What I think happens a lot now is people look at their P&L and say, okay, well, how do we grow by 10%? How do we grow by 20%? Why? Because that's the way we've always done it, right? So for me, it's that fundamental shift in terms of how do we think about things. So it really is quite a big cultural shift. And that brings up lots of different emotions around change, around uncertainty. Well, what am I certain about anymore? Well, not a huge amount of things. And a lot of people feel very uncomfortable with that. But I think that's one of the key cultural things, is orientating the model towards the future. So that's the first one. Then I think the juxtaposition for that as well is around resilience, which is how do we manage ourselves in order to be able to go and achieve something that we can't quite see so clearly, whereas 10-20% we can see that quite clearly. And if I pull on a data point, it was I think from 18 months ago, they looked at the number of CEOs in the FTSE 350 who stood down. Between 2021 and 2022, it doubled. So more than 10% of FTSE 350 CEOs stood down in 2022, up from 5% the previous year. There's lots and lots of similar statistics, which tell me that the skills around resilience, around adaptability, we are to be found wanting in terms of those skills. And I think those things need a fundamental rethink around, how do we tackle those challenges, especially when we're going out there for those big, bold, uncertain goals. And I think that so much of what I would describe traditional resilience thinking is almost like, just tough it out and okay, we'll just go and do this and sort of, come on, let's just go and do this. And I don't think that's fit for purpose anymore. I think the resilience skills that worked 10, 20 years ago don't work anymore. So for me, when I think about resilience skills, that's a lot of the internal dimension, how we think about us, how do we think about our own emotional patterns, what's actually going on for each of us, and how do we curate and manage our own self-leadership day to day. So for me, and there's clearly a lot more depth we can talk about, but it's the juxtaposition of those two different things. The market is forcing us to look out there into the future and think big and bold. That brings into sharp contrast that we haven't necessarily got the resilience skills to be able to deal with that. So that needs to be developed in conjunction with that. So for me, those are two of probably the most important shifts, I think.
That makes total sense. And if leaders and managers start to do those two paradoxical things, what do you think will be the impact on the people around them?
Yeah, look, what that does is that clearly then puts pressure on the big bold goals, put pressure not just on you, but on the entire team. So everybody has to rise up at the same level. So therefore, it's making those resilience skills, those tools available to a much wider much more widely inside the organization. One of my passions is around mental health. I'm involved in a number of different mental health early stage businesses, building technology platforms, doing services and so on. And actually just looking at the challenges across organizations, that level needs to rise up significantly. And the access to that type of help needs to be much more prevalent. So I think that it will definitely put pressure across the organization, but therefore we need to have an upping of those skill levels to be able to deal with that.
I find it interesting that it's a high challenge, high support type culture. It sounds like one where pressure is good, pressure is not bad. As a team leader, you are allowed to put pressure on your people. It's not about making it this sort of cozy, stifling place to work. That is good. It's just about ensuring that it's balanced and matched with high levels of support for someone's mental health, and you can do both in tandem. When I've worked with leaders, I find that they struggle to hold those two things in place. I find leaders will tend to go on one side or the other. So you have the leader who pushes hard, expects high, directs, but then doesn't give enough support. And then equally, you've got the team leader who you'd love to go for a pint with at the end of the day, and you really like and respect as a human being. But also they're scared to give difficult feedback. They're scared to set audacious goals. And I agree with you that if team leaders are able to do both challenge and support the mental health of people and provide, both of those things at once, that's the environment that will create high performance and performance that is sustainable over time.
You know, I think you've summarized that beautifully, because I think it's a really hard line to walk. I'm not saying this is easy, but it's exactly that. People do tend to go one way or the other way, but it's in those two things. That's where the tension exists. And, deliberately, I guess, in my work, there's the tension between the big, bold mindset and being more human. The tension is there between those two different things. But I think, one of the accompanying things that I observe makes that a lot easier is the notions of humility, the notions of open-mindedness and curiosity. And this is something that I see as very evident in a lot of the big, bold leaders that I've studied. And I think when one has those characteristics, that helps to reframe things like failure and challenge. Well, okay, what can I learn from this? What can I do differently? And so therefore, this mindset of just continuously running experiments and helping us to inform where we're going, I think it enables us to be a lot more gentle on ourselves, rather than sort of beating ourselves up because we made a bad decision. And it's just that continual iteration. And as Peter Diamandis says, the road to bold is paved with failures. And it's just sort of accepting that's just a part of the thing. And I think, so often people veer to one dimension or the other dimension that you mentioned there because of that fear of failure. But actually, I think embracing that and that sense of curiosity is a helpful path through that challenge, that paradox.
And I think we're talking about quite sort of big ideas here, and what I'd love to do is to talk about some like really pragmatic and practical things that you would suggest leaders do, after listening to this podcast episode, for example, things that they can say, things that they can do, really small things to start to put these big ideas into practice straight away.
Yeah, no, great. Look, so let me tell you, actually what I'll do, I'll give you a construct which I often use, or we often use in a lot of our programs and workshops, which basically it starts off by getting people in pairs to really spend the time listening to each other and listening to what's driving each person, and to play that back, to demonstrate they're really listening and understanding, and to build that relationship, that rapport between people. And it's, it's a skill that's vital at home as much as it is at work. And by the way, all the things that I say, I believe all the skills can be developed at home or at work. And paradoxically, actually, I learned most of my skills for leadership in the home environment, became a better leader, better parent, a better husband. And once I developed the skills there, then I took them back into the workplace and said, oh, hang on, these skills work quite well here as well, which just showed the fact to me they're human skills. So So the first point is, that listening, really taking the time to listen. And I think, when someone has had that experience of someone being 100% present, listening to you, really understanding what's going on for you, it's just an incredible experience, and it doesn't happen very, very often, I'm sad to say. So quite often that's a really, really good starting point of what I call deep listening, which I go into a little bit more detail in the book on. So that's a really good thing. Then the second thing that I think is very, very powerful is getting people to be sharing experiences when they've been challenged, to be open, to be vulnerable with colleagues. Here's the things that I've really, really struggled with, and here's the things that I found that were helpful to pull me out of that. And I think when we do that, then that openness, it brings us closer to other people. And we realize, actually, what, you're a human being just like I am. And it makes it easier for us to deal with those challenges. So that piece around sharing challenge is very, very powerful. And then the third exercise that we do, and that's probably the most powerful exercise that I think I have observed in the teams that I work with, is what I call the superpowers activity. Now, like you, like I, and perhaps most of your listeners will have done things like insights, discs, Myers-Briggs, and so on. And you get back the big computer printout showing your strengths, your weaknesses, where you're best suited, and all those sorts of things. And those definitely have a place. But for me, the most powerful thing I've ever done around this is, what I call the superpowers activity. I talk about in some length in the book. Well, basically, you go and ask people who know you well, what's the thing that I'm really, really amazing at? And you're just finding that one or two superpowers, one of those two strengths. And when you start hearing in the voices of people that you know, you trust, you like, and they're all saying the same thing about you or very similar things, what I notice is we tend to take much more notice of that. And you start pulling on that thread where your strengths lie. What I notice about human beings is so often, when we're exceptional at doing something, we tend to undervalue that and say, well, I'm amazing at that, then probably everybody else is as well. So we never really get to that zone of what are those things to dial in on. So that exercise of finding out for yourself from people who know you well what you're really, really amazing at doing, and then having a conversation with your colleagues around that. Actually, here's what I'm really good at. And so everyone will say, oh, well, yeah, I can see that in you as well. And it's really bringing that conversation to life. It's very human conversations. So all those three things there, for me, it's humanizing the people around you. It's building stronger, deeper relationships that we said a little bit earlier that helps downstream to deal with all those other different issues. So they're three very, very practical, simple conversations. One around listening, one around resilience, one around building on your strengths. And for me, creating that bedrock in whether it's a big team, small team, doesn't make any difference. Home team's exactly the same thing, right? For me, very, very practical, but very, very powerful at the same time.
What I love about them is they're all controllable. If you're listening to this as a team leader, you can go away and do this. Nothing's stopping you from doing it. It is solely in your control to start to listen more in conversations and to have those conversations that you described. What I really liked about the superpowers activity is it's the specificity of positive feedback. So what I notice is we can be quite specific when it comes to constructive feedback often because we're fearful that what we say will have a negative impact. So we invest time in preparing our message and saying, here's exactly what you need to change. But then when it comes to the positive feedback, we'll say, yeah, great job, awesome work, top stuff. But why? Why was that work so good? Tell me, because if I don't know, then I can't repeat those things, right? So it's being as specific with your positive feedback as you are with your constructive feedback. I loved how you did X because it meant that Y. In the future, would love it if you do more of that. And it's equally as powerful, more powerful, because you're both praising them and they know to repeat it. So it's still really good feedback. So the reason I'm saying that is because your superpowers activity, people are probably hearing stuff that people have thought of, but they've just said top job, as opposed to, Caspar, I really love it when you X, Y, Z, and I think that's your superpower. So it's just sort of getting that sort of specific positive feedback out for people, as opposed to just keeping it in people's heads.
Yeah, absolutely right. And look, I think the more I spend time in the working world, just the world generally, is that every single person is so unique, has got such a different set of skills and experiences, and taking the time to really understand what is brilliant about each person, what's that unique thing that they bring over and above. I'm in finance or in marketing or in HR, whatever the headline role is. It's those personal characteristics, those traits. Oh, you're really good at building relationships, or you're really good at opening up new conversations, you're really good at sort of solving really tough problems. It's knowing those behavioral aspects of the people around your team, having that conversation around that. There's something so very empowering around that. And the other thing that's really powerful as well. So I remember when I first did this exercise, and I can still remember the words that other people used about me, because they really landed with me, because they were people that I trusted. And it's when I charted that out, and I've used that almost as like my pole star. Well, not almost, I have used it as my pole star to say that that's the direction that I should double down on. And it literally came from asking people who knew me well and sort of, okay, I'm going to lean more into that. So it's just, again, those very, very simple human clues. It's so easy to make something so complex, but actually everyone around you already knows what you're brilliant at. All you've got to do is go and ask them.
Yeah, great. And on the topic of all these sort of small practical things, a question I ask all my guests is, what's a culture hack that you love? So that's something that takes little effort but can have a big impact.
Look, I think my favorite one is that one we've literally just been talking about there, about the superpowers. Yeah. And I think the other one is a simple culture hack. When you ask someone a question, stop and listen to the response, rather than just sort of, you know how it is. We're going, oh, how are you? Oh, okay, great. And you're just not really thinking about that. You're just powering through there. If you ask a question, stop and listen to it. I mean, it's
it sounds so basic, but for me, there's a big difference between behaviors and skills. And what I find is often we confuse the two. So when someone doesn't do something, we assume they've not got the skills. So then we send people on active listening workshops and things like that. I'm telling you now, if you put those same people in an interview tomorrow, they will listen, and they will listen actively. They can do it. They just choose not to because they've got distractions going on or whatever it might be, right? So for me, it's one of those things of, even if you can do it, it's not can you or can't you, it's are you doing it? Look at yourself hard in the mirror and ask yourself, am I really doing this as consistently as I want to be doing? Am I doing it on my bad days? Am I doing it consistently with different types of people? That's what you should ask, not can I do it? Of course you can probably do it already. Most people know how to listen. They just choose not to, consciously or otherwise. So I totally agree that is a culture hack, that if people it's a skill you've already got, just do it more consistently, and you will build the trust of people around you. You'll get better ideas. You'll build a better culture around you. So I totally understand why you went there for your culture hack.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's interesting, by the way. I mean, one of the things that I always ask my audiences is this question around past, present, future, which again just shines a light for me on how we are all so different. And this is a question that came out of a recurring argument that I used to have both in my home life and my work life, where I would say, let's go and do this in the future. And then somebody else would say, but we've always done it this way in the past. It used to frustrate the hell out of me. It's like, why can't we just go and do that thing out there in the future? And let me develop this question, which is, of 100% of your time, energy, and focus, what percentage gets drawn towards the past, the present, and the future? So when I first asked myself this, I said I'm about 0% in the past, which, by the way, I don't recommend, because you need to look at the past and reflect and learn from that. So I've changed my numbers since I became more self-aware around this. But back in the day, it was 0% in the past, 10% in the present, and about 90% in the future. When I asked Nicola, my wife, she said her numbers were about 50% in the past, about 30% in the present, and about 20% in the future. Look, it's very rough, broad brush numbers, but it paints a picture. And what I find is that I was talking about the future and she was talking about the past. And so actually just that one piece of understanding enabled us to have a gateway then to have better conversations. But fundamentally what it's doing is facilitating a conversation to say we all look at the world very, very differently. We've all got diverse views. And I always ask my audiences, where do they most tend to focus? And you can see hands up across the room. Everyone's got a completely different focus. And it's one of many biases that we've got, that we all look at things differently. And if we really want to unlock the talents in our team, we've got to take that time to understand what's driving each and every person. And there's all these little sort of roadways into it, which just give us that insight and that understanding, so that we can basically have better conversations to say how are we going to go and do this together.
Absolutely, and it all comes from that first step of asking good questions and properly, actively, fully listening and anchoring yourself in the present, switching off distractions. And by the way, this is something that I am not good at. This is something that I struggle with every day. So if you're listening and you're thinking Matt and Caspar are getting on their high horses, I'm not at all. Quite the opposite. This is something I definitely need to get better at. So thank you for the reminder. And I am also conscious that we could talk about this all day, and I'm really conscious of your time and the listeners' time. So Caspar, just before we close, do you have any final reflections on our conversation?
Look, I think that I've really enjoyed the questions that you've been sharing here. I think one of the simple hacks I would always sort of put all this back to is the reason that I have a thumbprint on all my books is that if you're ever in a situation you're unsure about what to do, I always say, just look at your thumb. Remember that you've got a thumbprint there. You're a human being, just like everybody else is. What would a human being do in this situation? And so often I find just that reminder just cuts through everything. A lot of things that I share, they seem simple and they seem self-evident. I'm a great believer in trying to simplify things. The world is complex enough. It doesn't need more complexity. So just going back to that very human level, what is it that makes each person tick? How can we unlock that so that we can go and achieve everything? And look at your thumb. You're a human being, just like everybody else.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Caspar. What a lovely note to end on. So I just want to say a huge thank you to you for sharing your time today and your experiences. Thank you so much, Caspar. And if people want to contact you, what's the best way to do so?
Yeah, by the way, thank you, Matt, as well. But I've really enjoyed our conversation too. So thank you for the generous questions. Look, I'm quite easy to find. Caspar Craven, Caspar Craven. My website, casparcraven.com, LinkedIn, all the usual places.
Brilliant. Awesome. Thank you so much. So the only final things to say are, if you like this episode, please do listen to our other episodes for more first-hand experiences and lessons on all things culture. Otherwise, that's all for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Go well, everybody.